I never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these posts. For years, I was the person reading them and quietly thinking, how do people not see it? How do they miss the signs? Now I understand, because when you're inside your own life, things don't look suspicious. They look normal. They look familiar. They look like the person you've trusted for over a decade. My wife and I have been married for 11 years. We met in our mid-20s, built a life together, bought a house, adopted a dog, and settled into what I honestly believed was a good marriage. Not perfect, just good. The kind of marriage that doesn't make exciting stories. We both worked full-time. We split responsibilities fairly. We still watched shows together at night. We still argued occasionally about dumb things like groceries or whose turn it was to call the plumber. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming. If someone had asked me 6 months ago whether I trusted my wife, I would have said yes without hesitation. Her name is Emily. She's always been ambitious. When we first met, she was the type of person who color-coded her calendar and planned vacations 6 months in advance. She worked hard because she genuinely cared about doing a good job. About 3 years ago, she got promoted into a management role at a consulting firm. The promotion came with more responsibility, longer hours, and a new department head. I'll call him Ryan. At the time, Ryan seemed completely ordinary. He was in his mid-40s, married, had 2 kids, and apparently had a reputation for being demanding but effective. The first few times Emily mentioned him, it was in the same way she'd mention any coworker. Ryan wants the report done by Friday. Ryan moved the client meeting. Ryan thinks we should restructure the project. Normal work stuff. I never thought twice about it. Honestly, I was proud of her. She seemed energized by the challenge. She talked about new opportunities, larger projects, and potential future promotions. I encouraged all of it. If working late occasionally helped her career, I didn't mind. I trusted her. Around that time, her schedule started changing. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. A meeting here, a late client call there, a dinner with executives once every few weeks. Again, nothing unusual. Corporate jobs can be demanding. I knew that. But little things began stacking on top of each other. Sometimes she'd come home exhausted and barely speak. Sometimes she'd spend dinner scrolling through emails. Sometimes I'd ask how her day went and get a strangely short answer. Fine. Really? Same as always. That wasn't really like her. Emily usually loved telling stories. She'd rant about office politics or laugh about ridiculous client requests. Now conversations felt thinner, like she was present physically, but somewhere else mentally. I noticed it, then immediately told myself not to overthink it. People get stressed. Jobs change. Life happens. A few weeks later, she came home after 9 p.m. I was watching TV when she walked through the door. She looked tired, not exhausted, just distracted. I asked how the meeting went. She paused, only for a second, then said, "What meeting?" I laughed. "The one you texted me about." Another pause. What? Sorry, long day." Then she disappeared upstairs. It was such a tiny moment, so small that I almost forgot it happened. Almost, because later that night, lying awake beside her, I found myself replaying that 2-second hesitation, wondering why she needed to think about a meeting she'd supposedly just attended. And for the first time in 11 years of marriage, a thought entered my mind that I immediately hated myself for having. What if something isn't right? I wish I could point to a single moment and say, that's when everything changed. That would make this story easier to tell. The truth is that nothing happened all at once. Instead, it felt like standing in a room while the temperature slowly dropped. You don't notice it immediately. You just become vaguely uncomfortable and can't explain why. For a while, I convinced myself that the strange feeling I had after that conversation about the meeting was nothing. Emily was busy. Her company had landed several major clients. Her team was expanding. People under pressure forget things. That was the explanation I chose. And for a few weeks, I genuinely believed it. Then the little inconsistencies started appearing. Not huge lies, not obvious lies, just details that didn't fit together perfectly. One Friday evening, Emily told me she had a last-minute strategy meeting with senior management. I remember it because we had planned to order takeout and watch a movie together. She looked annoyed when she told me. "Ryan moved everything around again," she said while grabbing her laptop bag. "I probably won't be home until late." I shrugged. That sucks. She left around 6. At 9:30, she texted that the meeting was still going. At 11, she finally came home. I was half asleep on the couch. When she walked in, I noticed she looked surprisingly cheerful. Not exhausted, not irritated, actually cheerful. I joked, "Must have been one hell of a meeting." The smile disappeared almost immediately. She laughed awkwardly. "You know what I mean." Then she headed upstairs. Again, not enough to accuse anyone of anything. just strange. A week later, something similar happened. Emily told me she was attending a networking dinner with clients. Nothing unusual there. Her company hosted those occasionally. When she got home, I casually asked where they went. She named a restaurant downtown. The problem was that she'd hesitated before answering, only for a moment, but long enough for me to notice. I remember the feeling that settled in my stomach afterward. Not suspicion exactly, more like confusion. Why hesitate? If she'd really been there, wouldn't the answer come naturally? I hated the way my brain was starting to work. Every small detail felt significant. Every inconsistency felt like a clue. I kept telling myself to stop. I kept failing. Then there was her phone. For most of our marriage, neither of us cared about devices. Our phones sat on tables. Passwords were shared. Nothing was secret. Gradually that changed. Emily started carrying her phone everywhere. Mav room, laundry room, kitchen, even chore trips to take out the trash. At first I barely noticed. Then I realized she never left it unattended anymore. Not once. One night she was showering when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I wasn't trying to snoop, honestly. The screen simply lit up beside me. A preview appeared. The sender's name vanished almost immediately because of the privacy settings, but I managed to read part of the message. Thanks again for tonight, that was it. The notification disappeared before I could see more. When Emily came out of the bathroom, she checked her phone immediately. Immediately, within seconds, I watched her face carefully. Nothing dramatic happened. No panic. No visible guilt, but there was a brief expression I couldn't identify. Something between nervousness and anticipation. Then she looked up and caught me watching. What? The question came out sharper than expected. I shook my head. Nothing. Her eyes stayed on me for another second. Then she turned away. The room suddenly felt uncomfortable. That night I barely slept. Not because I thought she was cheating. At least that's what I told myself. I couldn't stop thinking about how many explanations existed for every strange thing I'd noticed. And yet, despite all those explanations, the uneasy feeling kept growing. A few days later, I met my friend Mark for drinks. I didn't intend to talk about my marriage, but before the night was over, I found myself describing every strange little detail. When I finished, Mark was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked a question that would stay with me for weeks. Have you ever actually met this Ryan guy? Mark's question should have had a simple answer. Have you ever actually met this Ryan guy? I sat there staring into my drink for a second before realizing I hadn't. Not really. I'd seen photos from company events. I'd heard stories. I'd listened to Emily talk about him for years, but I'd never actually met him face to face. That realization bothered me more than it should have. I tried to brush it off. Large companies are like that. You don't necessarily meet your spouse's coworkers. Still, on the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The truth was that Ryan had become a surprisingly large presence in our lives. Not physically, just through Emily. His name came up constantly. Ryan thought this. Ryan wanted that. Ryan changed the schedule. Ryan loved this client. Ryan hated that proposal. The more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed. I knew more about this man than I knew about some of my own coworkers. Yet I'd never shaken his hand. The following week, I started noticing things I probably would have ignored before. One Tuesday evening, Emily came home looking drained. I asked how her day had gone. She sighed dramatically. Ryan was impossible today. Normal answer, except 20 minutes later, while we were eating dinner, her phone buzzed. She looked down and smiled. Not a polite smile, not a professional smile, a genuine one, the kind that reaches your eyes, the kind people don't usually have after talking about how impossible someone is. The smile vanished as soon as she noticed me looking. One of those tiny moments. One of those things that could mean absolutely nothing, but they kept happening. A few days later, she was getting ready for work when she changed outfits 3 times. That wasn't unusual by itself. What caught my attention was her explanation. Big meeting today. Then, while adjusting her earrings in the mirror, she casually added, Ryan will be there. The sentence landed strangely. I couldn't explain why. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. The way someone might mention an audience rather than a coworker. I hated myself for noticing. I hated myself even more for remembering it. Around this time, her work travel started increasing. Again, nothing extreme, just enough to be noticeable. A conference here, a client visit there, an overnight trip that became 2 nights, a 2-night trip that became 3. Every explanation sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they created a pattern I couldn't quite ignore. One Friday evening, I asked whether she'd be attending the company's annual holiday event. She looked surprised. Of course. You'll bring me, right? Another pause. Tiny, almost invisible. Then she laughed. Obviously. But she didn't sound enthusiastic. She sounded cornered. That bothered me. The event was 6 weeks away. Yet somehow she looked uncomfortable discussing it. For the next several days, I found myself paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. How quickly she responded to certain messages, how often she checked her phone, how her mood changed after specific notifications. I wasn't proud of it. In fact, I felt guilty. Every observation made me feel like a paranoid husband looking for problems that didn't exist. So I repeatedly talked myself out of my own suspicions. You're insecure. You're overthinking. She's stressed. You're creating stories in your head. For a while, those explanations worked. Then something happened that I couldn't explain away. One evening, Emily left her laptop open on the dining room table while she took the dog outside. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't searching for evidence. I simply glanced at the screen as I walked past and saw a chat window. Most of the conversation was hidden, but one message remained visible near the bottom. It was from Ryan, and it didn't look like a message a boss normally sends an employee. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't sexual. It was only 6 words long. But when I read, every hair on my arm stood up because it said, "Don't worry, he has no idea." And before I could read anything else, I heard the front door opening. The second I heard the front door open, I looked away from the laptop. My heart was pounding so hard it felt ridiculous. I remember standing there, staring at absolutely nothing, trying to look normal, trying to convince myself I hadn't just seen what I thought I'd seen. Emily walked back inside carrying the dog's leash. "Everything okay?" he asked. I realized I was still standing in the middle of the dining room. Ugh, my voice sounded strange. Too quick, too forced. She looked at me for a second, then at the laptop. Without saying anything, she crossed the room and closed it. The motion was casual, almost automatic, but something about it felt deliberate. I spent the rest of that evening barely hearing anything she said. My brain kept replaying those 6 words. Don't worry, he has no idea. Maybe it was about a client. Maybe it was about a coworker. Maybe it was completely innocent. I repeated those possibilities to myself over and over. The problem was that I didn't believe them. Not completely, because context matters. And by that point, there were already too many little things sitting in the back of my mind. The late nights, the phone secrecy, the schedule changes, the defensiveness, the pauses, the strange smiles, the constant mention of Ryan. For the first time, I seriously considered the possibility that something was happening, not because of proof, because of accumulation, 1,000 tiny details pressing in the same direction. The next few days were awful, not because I learned anything new, because I couldn't stop thinking. Every moment became exhausting. I'd be sitting at work trying to focus on a report and suddenly remember the message. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and replay old conversations. I'd start constructing explanations, then destroying them, then rebuilding them again. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating normally. I was stuck in a loop. Eventually, I told Mark about the message. We met for lunch on a Saturday. The second I finished describing it, he frowned. That's weird. That's what I thought. Could it mean something innocent? Maybe. But you don't think so? I stared at my coffee. No? Mark nodded slowly. Then he asked a question I wasn't prepared for. If you found out she was cheating, would you actually want to know? I answered immediately. Of course. But later I realized the answer wasn't that simple. Because uncertainty is painful, but certainty can destroy your life. A few days later, another inconsistency appeared. A small one. The kind that shouldn't matter. Emily told me she was attending a client dinner on Thursday. Around 8 that evening, I sent her a text. No response. 9 o'clock. Nothing. 10 o'clock. Still nothing. Around 10:30 she finally replied. Sorry. Dinner ran long. Simple enough. Except the next morning I was scrolling through social media before work, and I saw a post from one of her coworkers. A group photo. 6 employees, taken at the client dinner. The timestamp showed it had been posted shortly after 8. The caption thanked everyone for a great evening. What caught my attention wasn't who was in the photo. It was who wasn't. Emily. No Emily. No explanation. No mention of leaving early. Nothing. At first I thought maybe she'd stepped away when the photo was taken. Then I noticed something else. Ryan wasn't in the picture either. I stared at the screen for a long time. Long enough that my coffee went cold. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe both of them missed the photo. Maybe. But for the first time, coincidence started feeling less likely than the alternative. That evening I casually mentioned a post. Emily froze for a fraction of a second, then smiled. Oh, death! I had already left. Before 8, another pause. Oh, around 9. I nodded. She changed the subject immediately, and that's when something shifted inside me. For months I'd been trying to prove my suspicions wrong, trying to find innocent explanations, trying to preserve the version of my marriage that I believed existed. But sitting there across from her, watching her avoid a simple conversation, I realized something terrifying. I no longer trusted her answers, and once trust starts breaking, every new detail begins to look different. That night, after she fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. For the first time, I wasn't wondering whether I should investigate further. I was wondering how much I had already missed. Because if she was lying now, then maybe she'd been lying for a very long time. I wish I could tell you that once I decided to investigate, everything became clear. It didn't. If anything, things became more confusing. Because real life isn't a movie, you don't suddenly uncover a secret folder labeled affair evidence. Instead, you find fragments, half-truths, coincidences, tiny details that could mean everything or absolutely nothing, and every single one of them starts living in your head. For the next 2 weeks, I became someone I barely recognized. Outwardly, I acted normal. I went to work, made dinner, talked with Emily about our days, watched TV beside her. Inside, though, I was constantly paying attention, listening, observing, comparing. Every explanation she gave me quietly got filed away in my memory. I started noticing patterns. The biggest one involved what Emily called work emergencies. At first, those emergencies had seemed random. Now they didn't. They almost always happened in the evenings, usually after dinner, usually with very little notice, and strangely, they seemed to involve Ryan more often than anyone else. One Tuesday, she received a text while we were watching a movie. I watched her read it. Something changed in her expression immediately. Not panic, not stress, anticipation. She stood up before the message was even fully read. Problem at work. I looked at her. What happened? Client issue. Which client? She hesitated, then gave a name. The answer came just a little too slowly. Not enough to prove anything, enough to bother me. 3 hours later, she came home. I asked how everything went. Her explanation was vague, very vague, almost aggressively vague. When I asked follow-up questions, she became irritated. Do you really want to hear work details right now? That response stuck with me, because for years she had loved talking about work. Now she seemed determined not to. A few days later, I found myself doing something I never imagined I'd do. I started checking timelines. Nothing invasive, just comparing things she'd told me against publicly available information. Meeting dates, company events, travel schedules, social media posts. The more I compared, the more inconsistencies appeared. Not dramatic lies, just strange gaps. Places where her version of events didn't quite line up with reality. One Friday afternoon, I called Mark. We met after work. I dumped everything on him. The missing dinner photo, the emergencies, the messages, the inconsistencies. When I finished, he looked uncomfortable, not skeptical, uncomfortable, as if he already knew where this was heading. Have you asked her directly? I've tried. She gets defensive. Mark nodded. Then he said something that hit harder than I expected. You're spending more energy trying to prove she's innocent than she is. I didn't answer, because he was right. Every day I was constructing explanations on her behalf. Excuses, justifications, alternative interpretations. Meanwhile, she wasn't offering clarity. She was offering distance. That realization hurt, more than any piece of evidence so far. A few nights later, I noticed something else. A message notification appeared on her phone while we were sitting together. The screen lit up for less than a second, just enough for me to see a contact name. Not Ryan, at least not directly. The contact was saved as initials. Oh no! The second she saw it, she picked up the phone. Immediately, then she angled the screen away from me. A simple movement. Natural, instinctive, but impossible to ignore. I watched her type a response. A surprisingly long one. Then another. Then another. We were supposedly watching a show together. She barely looked at the television. When she finally noticed me watching, she locked the screen. Sorry, work? The explanation arrived before I asked a question. That bothered me too. People usually explain themselves after being questioned, not before. The next morning, something happened that changed everything. Not because it confirmed an affair, because it gave me my first real clue. Emily was in the shower. Her phone was charging on the kitchen counter. A notification appeared. The screen lit up, just for a moment. Long enough for me to see the sender, long enough for me to see part of the message, and long enough to realize that RM was it a random coworker. Because the message read, still thinking about last night. Then, underneath it, wish we had more time. My blood went cold. And for the first time since this began, I stopped looking for innocent explanations. Because I couldn't think of a single one, I stared at the phone for what was probably less than 2 seconds. Then I looked away. Not because I suddenly developed a conscience. Because I panicked. My entire body reacted before my brain could catch up. The message disappeared when the screen went dark. But it didn't matter. I'd already read it. Still thinking about last night. Wish we had more time. I remember standing in the kitchen feeling physically sick. Not angry. Not yet. Just sick. Because for months, I'd been living inside uncertainty. Every suspicious detail had an alternative explanation. Every inconsistency could be rationalized. Now, for the first time, I had something that didn't fit into any innocent narrative. At least not one I could believe. The shower was still running upstairs. Emily was humming softly, completely normal, completely unaware that my understanding of our marriage had just shifted. I spent the rest of the morning functioning on autopilot. I answered emails, attended meetings, nodded during conversations. I couldn't tell you a single thing that happened at work that day. My mind was somewhere else. By evening, I'd convinced myself I needed more information, not because I wanted to catch her, because I needed certainty. I knew how dangerous assumptions could be. I knew what confirmation bias looked like. The last thing I wanted was to destroy my marriage based on a message that lacked context. So, I kept watching, kept listening, kept paying attention, and once I started looking through a different lens, certain things became impossible to ignore. The biggest change was emotional. I realized that Emily wasn't just becoming distant from me. She was becoming emotionally invested somewhere else. She laughed at her phone more than she laughed with me. She seemed energized after certain messages, distracted after others. There were moments when she'd be physically present but emotionally unavailable, like her attention belonged to someone who wasn't in the room. One evening I tested something, not intentionally at first. We were eating dinner when I casually mentioned Ryan. Nothing dramatic, just a random work-related comment. The reaction was immediate, subtle, but immediate. Her eyes snapped toward me, a fraction too quickly. Then she looked away. "You talk about him a lot lately?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. She froze, just for a second, then laughed. "No, I don't." "You kind of do." Her expression hardened. "He is my boss." The answer arrived too fast, too defensive. I hadn't accused her of anything, yet she reacted as if I had. The conversation ended there, but something important happened. For the first time, I saw fear, not guilt. Fear, a brief flash of it, then it was gone. The following week brought another surprise. The company's annual holiday event finally arrived. The same event she'd seemed strangely reluctant to discuss weeks earlier. I attended with her, and that's where I met Ryan. The moment feels burned into my memory, not because anything dramatic happened, because nothing did. Ryan was charming, confident, professional, the kind of executive who could make a room like him within minutes. He shook my hand firmly, smiled, asked questions about my job, complimented Emily's work. Everything looked perfectly normal, yet something felt off. I couldn't identify it immediately. Then I noticed the way they interacted. Tiny things. A glance that lasted slightly too long. An inside joke nobody else understood. The ease with which they occupied each other's space. It wasn't obviously romantic. It was something more difficult to define. Familiarity. A level of comfort that seemed to exist outside normal professional boundaries. At one point, Ryan placed a hand lightly on her shoulder while speaking. Nobody else appeared to notice, but I did. And so did Emily. She didn't react, didn't move away, didn't seem surprised. The gesture felt practiced, natural, routine. Later that evening, I stepped away to grab a drink. When I returned, I found them standing alone near a hallway, talking quietly. Neither saw me immediately. What I remember most isn't what they were saying. It's how Emily was looking at him. I've spent months trying to describe that expression. The closest word I can find is warmth, not admiration, not respect. Something deeper, something personal. Then Ryan noticed me, and in a single instant, both of them changed. The conversation ended. The distance between them increased. The smiles disappeared. It happened so quickly that anyone else would have missed it, but I didn't. And as I drove home that night, one realization kept repeating in my mind. I was no longer trying to determine whether there was an emotional affair. I was trying to figure out how long it had been happening. Because whatever existed between them, it wasn't professional. And it definitely wasn't new. After the holiday event, something changed in me. Not externally. I still acted normal. I still joked with Emily. Still made breakfast. Still did everything I was supposed to do. Internally, though, I stopped debating whether something was happening. I was past that stage. Now I was just trying to understand the shape of it. How long? How far? How real? And most importantly, what was I missing? The problem with that mindset is that you stop looking for proof of innocence. You start noticing everything that supports the fear. But even then, sometimes reality does the work for you. It doesn't ask permission. It just reveals itself. It happened on a Thursday. Emily told me she had a late strategy session with Ryan and two senior stakeholders. She left around 6. I didn't argue. I didn't question. I just nodded and said, okay. By that point, I'd stopped trying to sound normal. I just was normal. Outwardly. Inside, I was tracking time. I didn't tell her this, but I had started paying attention to patterns in how long these sessions usually lasted. This one felt different, shorter, like it was designed to end earlier. At around 9:40 p.m. she texted, still going, don't wait up. That message should have reassured me. It didn't, because it felt rehearsed, like something she'd sent before. At 11:10 p.m. she came home, but something was wrong immediately, not in a dramatic way. No tears, no panic, just off. She moved slower than usual, avoided eye contact slightly, dropped her keys once, then laughed it off. I'm exhausted, she said. I nodded. Long meeting, yeah. She didn't elaborate. Usually she would have, even briefly. A joke about Ryan, a complaint about stakeholders, something, but there was nothing. Just silence. She went to shower, and that's when I noticed it. Her bag was still on the chair, near the hallway, half open. She'd left it like that before, but not often. I don't know what made me do it. I told myself I was just moving it out of the way. That's the lie I used. I carried it into the living room, set it down, and as I did, something shifted inside. The zipper wasn't fully closed. Inside, I saw her work folder, and a receipt slipped halfway out. Restaurant receipt. 2 people. Private dinner. Not company sponsored, not client labeled. Just a small, expensive place downtown I didn't recognize. Timestamp, 8:47 p.m. I stared at it for a long time, because that didn't match anything she had told me. Not the timeline, not the meeting, not the explanation, nothing. Then I saw another detail. On the back of the receipt, handwritten in pen, R+E. My hand actually started shaking. I sat down without realizing it. For a few minutes I didn't think at all. I just existed in that moment. Because this wasn't interpretation anymore. It wasn't suspicion. It wasn't pattern recognition. It was evidence. Real, physical, undeniable evidence of a dinner that wasn't work-related, and it placed her with him at a time she explicitly said she was in a meeting. I heard the shower stop upstairs, water turning off. Moment, normal life continuing above me while mine had just fractured in the quietest possible way. I slid the receipt back into the folder, closed the back, put it exactly where it had been. Then I sat on the couch pretending I was watching TV. But I wasn't. I was just waiting, because for the first time since this started, I wasn't wondering if I was right anymore. I was wondering what I was going to do when I finally said it out loud. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I lay next to Emily while she slept like nothing had changed, listening to her breathing, watching the ceiling, trying to force my mind into some calmer version of reality. But it kept circling back to the receipt. R+E. Simple, casual, careless. Or maybe not careless at all, maybe confident, like there was no reason to hide it anymore. At around 3 a.m., I got out of bed and went to the kitchen. I just stood there for a while, staring at the dark window like it might give me answers. What I kept thinking wasn't anger at first. It was scale. How long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? Had I been living beside someone leading a completely separate life and just not seeing it? The next morning I couldn't pretend anymore. Emily was already up, making coffee, scrolling through her phone. Normal. Too normal. I watched her for a moment before speaking. You got home late yesterday. He didn't look up. Yup. Long meeting. That her tone was automatic. Practiced. I nodded slowly. Where was it again that got her attention? She paused just slightly longer than necessary. Why just one word, but sharper than it needed to be? I'm just asking. She finally looked at me. Downtown. Until 11 more or less that I held her gaze. There was a moment there, a fragile one, like something could still be redirected if one of us blinked differently. Then I said it. I know you weren't in a meeting to have silence. Not dramatic silence. Real silence. The kind that fills a room. Her expression didn't change immediately. She just studied me, like she was trying to decide how to respond to a situation she hadn't prepared for. Then she laughed once. Short, disbelieving. What are you talking about? I went to the counter and placed the receipt down, carefully, like it might break something more if I did it too fast. Her eyes dropped to it, and I watched her face change, just slightly, but enough. She picked it up, looked at it longer than she needed to, then set it down again. That's not what it looks like. I almost laughed at that, because I had heard that sentence in my head for weeks. I was there last night, I said quietly. With Ryan. Her jaw tightened. It was work-related death, then why lie about the time? Another pause. Longer this time. I didn't lie. There were things after I shook my head. No. My voice came out calmer than I expected. You were with him. At a restaurant. Not a meeting, but she looked away. For the first time, she didn't have an immediate answer. That was worse than denial. Denial meant fight. This felt like calculation. You're exhausting yourself over nothing, she finally said. Nothing. That word. Something inside me cracked a little at that. Because it wasn't just dismissal. It was rewriting reality. I sat down across from her. I saw the receipt. Emily. She didn't respond. And the messages. Still nothing. And the way to look at it eventually made her flinch. Barely noticeable. But real. Then she stood up. I didn't want to do it. I did it then away. That was the moment something in me shifted completely. Not anger yet. Not fully. Something colder. More final. Because she wasn't denying anymore. She was avoiding. And as she reached the hallway, I said the last thing I hadn't said yet. I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. She stopped. Her back still turned to me. And for a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she said something so quiet I almost didn't hear it. Something that made the entire room feel different. It was going to be about everything I wasn't ready to lose. After she said, I can't do that, she didn't come back into the room. She just stood there in the hallway for a few seconds like she was deciding whether to leave or stay, then walked upstairs instead. No explanation, no follow-up, just footsteps fading into the bedroom. I stayed where I was. I didn't follow her. I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. I think part of me was still waiting for this to turn into a misunderstanding if I gave it enough space. Like silence might somehow reset the conversation. It didn't. About 20 minutes later she came back down. Changed clothes. Hair still slightly damp. Face composed in a way that felt artificial. She sat across from me this time, not next to me. That alone told me something had already shifted permanently. I don't want to hurt you, she said. I let out a short breath. That's a not a lot of accepted that. Then added, it was instead of felt my thumb slightly. This she hesitated. I got close to him. There it was. Not a denial. Not anymore. Just a controlled version of the truth. I stayed quiet. Let her continue. It started as work stuff. Because I needed to hear where she was going. At some point it turned into talking outside of work, she said. Then meeting after hours. It didn't feel like I don't know. It didn't. She looked down. That was enough of an answer. For a moment I thought she might stop there, but she didn't. It wasn't supposed to be serious, she added quickly. It wasn't planned. I laughed once, quietly. That's not what I asked. Silence again. Longer this time. Then I asked the question I had been avoiding since I found the receipt. Did you sleep with him? She closed her eyes. And for the first time, her composure broke slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough. I don't want to answer that like it defines everything, she said. That's not an answer. She inhaled slowly. I'm sorry. That was it. No denial. No explanation. Just apology without structure. Which somehow felt worse. Because now the shape of the truth was visible even if she wasn't saying it directly. I stood up. Walked to the window. Looked outside without really seeing anything. Behind me she said my name once. Softly. But I didn't respond. Because something inside me had already moved past the need for clarification. I had spent months trying to decode ambiguity, trying to translate inconsistencies into something survivable. But now there was nothing left to decode. Only confirmation, only consequences. When I finally turned back around, she was still sitting there, waiting for whatever came next. And I realized I didn't know if I was about to lose my marriage or if I already had, and just hadn't accepted it yet. I didn't ask any more questions that night. There was nothing left I needed her to confirm out loud. The shape of it was already there between us, fully formed, ugly, and impossible to unsee. We didn't fight. Not in the way people expect. No screaming, no breaking things. Just a long, exhausted quiet where every sentence felt unnecessary. At some point she asked if I wanted her to stay in the guest room. I told her it didn't matter, and I meant it. Because in that moment, together and separate already felt like outdated concepts. We were just two people in the same house trying not to collide emotionally. I slept maybe an hour, not because I was thinking about revenge or what I should do next, but because my brain kept replaying something much simpler. All the times I had trusted explanations that were carefully constructed to sound reasonable. Morning came without feeling like morning. I made coffee. She did too. We didn't talk much. At one point she tried to touch my arm when passing in the kitchen. I moved away without thinking. She noticed. Didn't try again. That was the closest thing to a dramatic moment we had. Later that day, I left the house and drove for a long time with no destination. I ended up parked near a river outside the city, just sitting there, trying to understand what part of my life was still intact. Not just the marriage, everything attached to it. Memory, routine, identity. All of it felt slightly rewritten. Over the next few days, things became procedural. We talked about logistics instead of feelings. Finances, the house, who would stay where temporarily, what to tell people. There was no reconciliation attempt from either side. I think both of us understood, in different ways, that this wasn't something you fix with better communication. There were also no confrontations with Ryan. I thought about it once or twice, briefly, but it never turned into action. Not because I was above it, just because it didn't feel like it would give me anything back. Whatever power he had in this situation wasn't something I could take away by talking to him. A week later, I moved into a small rental apartment, empty in a way that was almost peaceful. The first night there felt unreal. No familiar sounds, no shared routines, just silence that didn't belong to anyone else. Emily and I still exchanged messages occasionally after that. Short ones, practical ones. There was no attempt to rebuild anything in them, just coordination, slowly turning a shared life into two separate schedules. People sometimes ask what the final moment was. There wasn't one. No dramatic ending. No final argument that erased everything before it. Just a gradual acceptance that trust, once broken in a certain way, doesn't go back to what it was. And maybe the hardest part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was realizing how long I had been living next to a truth I didn't want to see. If there's anything I'm still processing, it's that. Not her, not them, just the version of my life I thought was real. Because that version doesn't exist anymore, and I'm still learning how to live in the one that does. This is the end of the story. Don't forget to share with your friends, comment, like, and subscribe.